So, Dave, thanks for taking the time to meet with me on Labor Day Monday, holiday.
You're welcome, Justin. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So, shall we just jump right in?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So, one of the first questions I've been asking folks
Mm-hmm.
when I've been having these talks with them is, what got you into coaching? What was the thing that sparked in your thought that said, this is something I want to do?
Well, it evolved out of my interest in Scrum and Agile, having been influenced by Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, and was really having some success there, and made an evolution from high-tech management and senior leadership positions, and I realized that I got a lot more impact and a lot more enjoyment out of helping other people be successful and sharing with them some of the things I knew, but more importantly, helping them to discover what they really knew. And it was that satisfaction of working with the people and seeing them grow that really got me interested.
What advice do you have for planning? Oh, I think a lot of Agile Scrum Masters, whether or not they're in Scrum or using Lean or other techniques, they struggle with how to plan and how to do that well and to know that they're doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about planning the work?
Mm-hmm. Well, planning, particularly at the sprint level, is really critical to pay attention to the empirical data. That's what is really unique about planning in an Agile, particularly in a Scrum environment, because it's not based on what people think they can do, because I built waterfall project plans for years and years and years based on what I thought people could do or what they thought they could do, and that was always wrong.
So how do you specifically help a Scrum Master look at the data? What specifically would you start them off looking at? Is it velocity?
The most important thing, particularly in a Scrum environment, in Lean it's a little different, but in a Scrum environment, is help the team stabilize their velocity and look at a 3-sprint rolling average of what their velocity is and velocity is calculated only on stories that are done. No partial credit.
Sure.
That'll average out over time, but you really want the team getting focused on what they can get to done during a sprint. And then working with the team during each planning activity to really discourage them from committing to and bringing things into the sprint that exceed their velocity.
Gotcha.
A lot of developers seem to be afraid that they will run out of work. And I just don't. Well, if you run out of work, you can bring more stuff in, right? Or But the important thing is to stabilize that velocity. Once you've got that stable velocity and you've got the teams in the habit of only pulling the work in that really can fit into that empirical velocity, then velocity becomes their friend, as opposed to what happens in some organizations where it becomes the hammer that the managers beat you with.
Fair enough. All right. Is there a tidbit that you would share for somebody who's been a Scrum Master for a couple years and they're thinking, how do they get beyond just using velocity? Is there some type of empirical evidence that they can use that can help improve their skills at being a Scrum Master or a team coach?
Well, there are things. I think planning in a Scrum environment, velocity is really the key. I think there are other aspects that Scrum Masters can use to help them become better Scrum Masters, and that starts to intentionally blur the line between Scrum Master and coach, and it's all about bringing a coaching stance to the Scrum Master role.
Okay. Why don't we talk about that for a second? That's
Sure.
a little bit of deviation from the prescribed list of questions.
Sure.
What is your sense of what the difference is between Scrum Master and Coach? Can you talk a little bit about what you just said?
Sure. Scrum Master tends to be focused more on, traditional, on the team itself, on the developers, the testers, the analysts, the product owners, and getting impediments out of their way, and serving the team. coach starts with a team looking at the people and how you can make the people work better together, because it's more than the skills and the practices, it's the values and the principles, and instilling the Agile values and principles and helping to reinforce those and help them be better at developing relationships and communications and collaboration. So that's where the Scrum Master starts being a coach to the team. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, a good Scrum Master needs to be a coach to the other stakeholders, to the partners, to the people who influence the product owners, to the product owners themselves, independent of the title level. The best Scrum Masters can coach people 2 or 3 grade levels above them by giving them the right kind of advice and asking the right kind of powerful questions. And that's really the key as you exercise the coaching muscle and bring that to the Scrum Master role. And I think it's best described in Lisa Adkins' book on coaching Agile teams.
Gotcha. All right. So our next question is, how do you know you're facilitating a quality retrospective stand-up? So really it comes down to the crux of this question is, how do you know you're doing it right? Mm-hmm. From a team, we'll start with just a team perspective. How do you know you're facilitating it in a way that's constructive? Mm-hmm. And thinking about stand-ups, because that's every day, or could be every day, and then retrospectives, certainly periodically, and then anything else that you think of. How do you know you're facilitating in a way that's supportive?
Yeah, I think within the daily stand-up, it's important that people stay focused on sharing the kind of information that's available so that you can get it, that's relevant to the stand-up, so that you can get it done in 15 minutes, and that anything that starts getting into deep dives comfortably gets moved to a parking lot. So when people, and that people feel they're getting something out of it because they're showing up regularly. So people are there because they're getting something out of it, not just because, okay, well, it's 9 o'clock and it's time to have our stand-up. And that's where you start to see some value out of the stand-up so that they can get them done. I've observed stand-ups with as many as 50 people. It's not a Scrum team, but a different kind of stand-up, where valuable information gets exchanged and it's done in 13 minutes. If you allow people to meander and talk about deep dive and rat hole and all that, you're not having an effective stand-up. So the stand-up comes from efficiently exchanging the right information and moving other conversations to follow-up meetings. Retrospectives, effectiveness, to me, it's a very different aspect. Uh-huh. They're effective, number one, when you're getting a lot of engagement, when you're getting rich, deep conversations, and that people are really bringing their whole selves to the meeting. When teams get together once every 2-3 weeks and their stand-up is their retrospective is 20 minutes, and they just go through what went well, what didn't go well, here's what I would change, check the box, that's a waste of time. Mm-hmm. If people are willing to spend some quality time, 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it takes, but have those deep, rich conversations and not just jump straight to action items and improvements or deltas, but are really doing a root cause analysis so they understand what's behind the symptoms that they're seeing and come up with thoughtful action items that implement that. Then the real key to the value of a retrospective is what happens in the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. If you've taken on 6 or 7 kind of high value, wishy-washy, high level, but not necessarily high value, kind of wishy-washy, gee, we should do better here, we should pay attention to that, nothing's going to happen. If you can get the team to focus on 1, at most 2, truly smart action items, people know the acronym, but they don't really pay attention to it, and that it's on all the dimensions, and they become high-value stories in the next iteration so that are actually reported on throughout the sprint, and at the end of the sprint that the value of that action item has been achieved. And then you start the next retrospective by celebrating the implementation of that action item. Then you know you're having really effective action items. So it's the engagement, it's the conversation, and it's the result, it's the business outcome, as opposed to, yes, we had the ceremony.
All right. I think that'll be really helpful to some of the folks listening and answer and talk about.
Well, I can quickly describe some of the resources that I used, but that was long enough ago that they are different than what I recommend today. So when I got started, it was I happened to stumble on a speech by Jeff Sutherland at a Boston Spin activity, and that got me thinking. I was lucky to have been at the right place at the right time. I was lucky to be in an organization that was small enough that I had enough influence that I could just say, we're going to do this. And it was a lot of self-teaching. Read Ken Schwaber's book on Agile project management at the time, and project management with Scrum, one of the few things that was available. Happened to get my Scrum Master training from a combination of both Jeff and Ken. They co-taught that. So I had access to good people, but a lot of it for me was self-learning. It was attending a lot of local meetings, whether it was the Spin group or what at the time was called Agile Bazaar, now Agile New England. Started with half a dozen people showing up at a classroom and sharing one or two pizzas to a much broader organization. So I did a lot of reading. I listened to a lot of people, and I was able to experiment. I had a small group that was willing to try things. But it was a longer process than it should be because I didn't have enough of the really good resources that are available today. Today, there's a much broader set of books, right? So, Ken's early books are still relevant, but I find things like Lisa Adkins' Coaching Agile Teams to be more helpful. The Scrum Guide is available. It's pretty clear. It tells you how to execute. But it's really teaching people and looking at things that go to the Agile values and principles, because it's more than a set of practices. It's more about being Agile. So it's like books by Mario Moreira and Gil Broza about being Agile. It's really focusing on the Agile values and principles, the Agile Manifesto, and understanding the principles behind them. Those are the keys. The mechanics of being a Scrum Master, you can get that from a 2-day Scrum Master training. You can get certified, you can pass the test, you can get the certificate of attendance, and yes, you're a certified Scrum Master, but that just gives you access to some of the techniques. It's really going to the local meetups or the conferences and reading the books and having the interest in digging into those values and principles and learning how to live them and teaching other people how to live them as well. And at the end of the day, it's really all about the people, much more so than any particular set of ceremonies or practices.
What would you suggest a hiring manager think about when hiring a Scrum Master, or if it's an Agile coach who's recommending? How do you think about the hiring of Scrum Masters?
So for the hiring, I think the key is to focus on culture and fit. You need to know your organizational culture, your organization's style, and look for people that will fit that style. Is it a collaborative organization? Is it a competence-driven organization? Schneiderman's book from the 90s is still relevant on understanding organizational cultures. Understand what's going to work in your environment. In some cases, Scrum Master has to get the respect of their people. Hopefully that respect can come from being the servant leader and helping them be the best that they can, and getting impediments out of their way. Sometimes some organizations will only respect a Scrum leader if they have a particular Scrum Master, if they only have a particular kind of technical knowledge, which I think is not nearly as relevant to some people place, but if that's what your organization values, you have to hire for that kind of style. So understand the culture, look for the fit, and the specific practices are easy to learn and easy to teach. If you're looking for a servant leader, are people really going to get benefit and personal satisfaction out of serving the high priority needs of others? So that's the key thing.
Last question for you. What advice would you have for someone who's just a Scrum Master that you've known to just, I'll say, as a general truism, that generally tends to be true, that some Scrum Masters are just not aware of in, say, their first year of being a Scrum Master, if there is any?
I think the key is to really understand what it means to be a servant leader. So you're simultaneously trying to meet the highest priority needs of the team, as well as provide them some of the other aspects of servant leadership. So start by making sure that you're getting the impediments out of their way, that you are helping them to meet their sprint goals, that you're helping them to deliver value to the organization. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is to look ways in which you can impart some vision, particularly around the Agile values and principles, that you can create opportunities for autonomy. So you go from removing the impediments for them, teaching them how to remove their own impediments, as an example. And those are the key elements that will really accelerate the team's growth and what the team can contribute.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today, and be well.
Thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate it.
All right.
I liked it a lot. Thank you.